While the film Thor Ragnarok may be referring to the Nordic apocalypse, today we're going to talk about the Nordic creation story. In the beginning, there's this giant gap of nothingness, and there's Niflheim and Muspelheim. Muspelheim is fire, Niflheim is ice. Together, by mixing, they make a giant man called Ymir. And then also this giant cow, and she kept licking the salt off the ice, and that's how she lived, and her milk fed the giant guy. And as he slept, he got really sweaty, and the giants arose from his armpits. So that tells you a lot about what the Norse thought of the giants. They were armpit minions. And the cow eventually licked force a guy from the ice, and then his son married a giantess, and then he had 3 sons. They're Odin, Vili, and V. Odin becomes the king of the gods. Vili and V sort of disappear, basically. We don't really know what they do. They're in a couple other stories, but like even then, like barely, so they're kind of forgotten. Odin's the one that really matters. But him and his brothers kill Ymir and make the world from his body. They make the earth from his body, and like bones and rocks are like the mountains, and they use sparks from his brain to make the stars, and the maggots become the dwarves. So that tells you a lot about what they thought about the dwarves. And the dwarves have a lot of fun names like Oakenshield and Thorin and Gandalf. These names may sound familiar to you. They make the sun and the moon, and they give them to these 2 deities. Sunna is the sun goddess, and they drove their little chariots around and were constantly chased by wolves, and at the end of time they will be devoured by these wolves. But the sun will give birth to a new daughter. But that's for later. They use Ymir's blood to make the oceans. They take an ash and an elm tree, and they make Ask and Embla, the first man and woman, and that's the birth of humanity. Giants don't really like them for killing their father and making the world out of him, so the giants and the gods are enemies. Also, Nordic cosmology is odd. They believed in a world tree, Yggdrasil, a giant ash tree, and I'm still not sure, no one's quite sure whether the world was like on different levels of the ash tree, or the ash tree was just in the world, but I think the ash tree was the universe and everything was just part of this tree. How did this tree get here? I don't remember, I don't know, I don't think they tell you, but it's there, and the world is in it. I usually divide it into 3 levels, but I'm pretty sure that's just a modern thing that they put in kids' books, but it stuck with me. Like, in the roots, there's like the underworld levels. These include Muspelheim, which is fire and home of the fire demons, including Surtur, who has this giant fire sword, and he will burn the world at the end of time. Sorry, spoilers, I keep spoiling the apocalypse for you. I hope it's okay. There's also Niflheim, which is just cold and icy. The thing about the 9 worlds is they were never exactly listed in any of the sources. We were told that there were 9, but we're not told exactly what they are. So we just sort of have guessed on what we think the 9 worlds are. The 9th is usually the one we're the fuzziest on. So some people put Hell, Land of the Dead, in Niflheim, and other people make it a separate world. But anyways, there's Hell, Land of the Dead. Surprise, surprise, it's called Hell. H-E-L, no second L, makes it different. It's ruled by Hela, the goddessy person, woman of death. She's like a two-faced character. Sometimes it's like half her face is red, half is blue. Other times it's like, sometimes half her face is pretty and the other half is like rotted. Some people have it like her waist down is rotted and the top half is a beautiful woman. So Hell is just half and half. She rules Land of the Dead. It's where you go if you die of pretty much anything other than dying in battle. So that's kind of depressing, like old age, sickness. You go to Hell. But there's also like super, like Uber Hell in the bottom of Hell, and that's where all these like poison snakes and torture chambers are, and that's for like people that were bad. But other people just sort of chill in Hell, and apparently it's not the worst. Like, she has a hall, and people just sort of chill there and feast, and it's kind of supposed to be like really sucky and lame, and just like her table is called Famine, but like it's not that bad. It's just sort of lame. That's my impression. It's like if you don't die in battle, you just go to like the lame afterlife, ruled over by this creepy, awkward lady. But then if you're really bad, you go to like the pits below. Those are the three worlds at the bottom of the tree. There's also at the bottom of the tree a giant dragon called Nidhogg or something, and it eats at the roots of the tree, and it's just eating it because it's a dragon and wants to F things up for everybody, so thanks. The middle level consists of Midgard, which means Middle Earth. I wonder where you got that, Tolkien. The land of humans surrounded by water, the Jormungandr serpent, the world serpent, is there, and it circles around the world. It bites its own tail, and it is super poisonous, but it's in the water around us. Also in the center of the world tree is Jotunheim, which is home of the giants, or the Jotun, mainly the frost giants, which are typically evil, but I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes they're giants, but sometimes they're not, because gods marry giantesses and they're like pretty and the same size as them, and like it works and isn't awkward. So, but sometimes then the giants are just giant. So that's slightly confusing. And also there's trolls and ogres, and I'm not sure what makes them different other than that they have successful DreamWorks franchises. I don't know what makes a troll, ogre, and giant different in Norse mythology, but they're all there. Svarvoldsheim or something. I've heard different ways to say it. But that's home to the dwarves or the dark elves, depending. Sometimes they're called dwarves, sometimes they're called dark elves. The Norse are pretty vague in what exactly is what, but they live underground, and they make weapons and crazy fancy jewelry and stuff for the gods. The gods used to make weapons, and they outsourced it to the dwarves, and the dwarves make stuff like what Kat Dennings calls Mjolnir, Thor's hammer. So yeah, the dwarves are also kind of creepy and pervy, and like they don't have names that describe their feelings, like in Snow White, or they don't go on fun quests like in The Hobbit. They're just like a little gross. Also in the middle region, there's like 4 stags that eat the leaves of the tree. So that's the thing. You go up then to like the higher regions, and that's where the gods live. Now, there were 2 tribes of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir were like gods of more like war and the sky, justice, like society, like that kind of stuff. And the Vanir were the gods of like water, earth, plants, sunshine, love, fertility, those kinds of things. The groups had a war, and they sort of merged in that the Vanir sent their important leaders as hostages to Asgard, and then the Aesir gave them like whatever like people they didn't really care about and like wanted to give up. Like actually Odin's brother was one of them. They're just like, you're not really important, here's somebody. So eventually Asgard becomes the main pantheon, and you're not sure if the Vanir just sort of like joined them, or if the Vanir just like chill in Vanaheim and don't get involved in people's drama. I'm not entirely sure. So Vanaheim is home of the Vanir gods. Some people think it might be like under the ground, sort of like the other world in Celtic mythology, which is home of the Tuatha Dé Danann, or like the fair folk. Some people say they will survive the apocalypse of Ragnarok. Again, spoiler alert, I'm sorry, but some people say the Vanir will make it, but the Aesir just won't. Some people think Vanaheim is up in the heavens, others say it's in the earth, under the ground, so it's in like the underworldly section. I'm not sure, no one is ever really clear. And there's also Affelheim, which is home of the elves, or the light elves, if you call the dwarves the dark elves. And they're like very common in like Nordic belief. They're kind of like the fair folk, and they can like heal illnesses and give illnesses, and they're good generally, but their powers are kind of vague. And we just know that really late into the Middle Ages, people were worshipping the elves and like leaving offerings, and eventually the laws were like, please stop worshipping the elves, we're Christian, don't. But the elves were popular, and they're associated with like sunlight and beauty, but also like, who knew what they were doing? But they were on the side of the gods. They were often partying with the gods, and it's kind of vague whether or not the gods were related to the elves, especially the Vanir. But Freyr was sort of the god of the elves. He was the god of sunlight and fertility and rain. He had a house, or he lived in Affelheim with his giant golden boar and golden chariot, and he was the king of the elves. And so with the elves, he led like creation of spring and summer and fertility. He was a pretty popular god, and so the elves were part of his retinue, and so some of the stories, they mention him having like his elf entourage. So the elves were like friends with the gods, but not quite the gods, but like still worshipped. and mainly hung out with Freyr. That's what we know about the elves in Niflheim. There's also Asgard, which literally means walled enclosure of the Aesir. The Aesir were the main pantheon of gods, with Odin and Thor and Loki tagging along, and eventually the most important Vanir gods lived in Asgard. So Asgard is basically the center of Nordic myths and legends. You can reach it through Bifrost, a giant rainbow bridge. Heimdall, who can like see all 9 worlds and is eternally vigilant, watches over the rainbow bridge. In Asgard, all the gods had their different halls. It's where they had the tree with the apples that they could eat to become immortal. Odin had a tower and a throne, and from that throne he could see all 9 worlds and see everything that happened. Him and his wife Frigga would sit on it and they'd see everything. It was also home to Valhalla, which is Odin's great hall where he would take all the slain warriors and they would essentially bro it out for eternity, waiting to fight for Odin in the apocalypse. They would just drink beer and eat meat all day, fed by these blonde, big-chested Valkyrie female warrior types, like the kind of people you'd see on like a German Oktoberfest ad, but in like armor, essentially. And these sort of like Norse mythology babe, angel warrior ladies would feed them beer and meat for eternity, and then they'd go out on this field and fight each other, and then they'd all heal and go back and drink some more. Some of the warriors went to the house of Freya, the goddess of love, because of like Odin was punishing her and was like, ha, you have to be in charge of war now. I know you hate it, but here you go. You have to fight with the Valkyrie. When the Valkyrie would gather up the men and take them up to Asgard, Odin would take most of them to Valhalla. She'd take some of them to her hall. So in her hall, I guess she just took the hot ones. That's my theory. But also people say that sometimes lovers or people who had especially great, super steamy love stories would get to go there and be together in the afterlife. People that just loved each other a lot. And there are stories where women who are suffering say that someday I will eat again with Freya in the afterlife. So maybe she like took the women in too. It's kind of vague. Also, there was a well that watered the world tree in Asgard, and the gods would meet there for their councils. It's also where the Norns were, and the Norns were basically the Fates. They would weave and tell the story of everyone alive. Everyone's fates were all woven by the Norns. So yeah, Asgard, big fortress full of halls, that was home of the main gods. Places like Asgard and Niflheim were considered up in the branches, like in the sky, sort of, at least vaguely. Also, there's this giant hawk in Yggdrasil that sat at the top of the tree. You'd think he'd play a role in anything, but he doesn't. He's just there. Him and Nidhogg the dragon have this little squirrel called Ratusk or whatever that like sends hate messages up and down the tree. It like runs up and down the tree sending hate messages between the dragon and the eagle. But yeah, the squirrel just delivers hate mail between this dragon and this eagle that sound like they should be important, but they don't really do anything as far as I can remember. Norse mythology is pretty fun. It's very epic and dramatic and a lot like a fantasy video game or fantasy novel. We don't know a ton about it, but what we do know is interesting and vague. So each story, each book sort of picks a version and goes with it. But that is sort of the Norse cosmos and what it looks like. Next time I do a Norse mythology day, we'll be learning about the different gods and their personalities. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more Real Talks with Cullen every Tuesday. Write down in the comment section anything you know about Norse mythology or any aspects you'd like me to touch on in my upcoming videos. I'll see ya next Tuesday. Bye.